Hey guys, as you can see here, I've got a bunch of firearms on the table. A viewer asked me to do a video on what to look for when buying your first firearm. I'm going to give you the full list here of what I actually look for when I'm buying a firearm and what I think a newer shooter should be on the lookout for. But I'm going to give you some scenarios of like what I see when a new person comes in to buy their first firearm, and often what I hear the salesmen say. And then we're also going to talk about each of these firearms a little bit and some of the features that like pertain to each of these and the uses of each of these that you might actually be on the lookout for when buying your first firearm. So here's the deal. When I purchase a firearm, the things that I'm looking for, and I'm going to say this first one with a little bit of a caveat to it. So when you hear the salesman's story, just know this is what they're talking about. I look for how it feels in my hand, grip. I look for the manual of arms. So I'm looking for, can I take this apart easily? Meaning if I want to take this slide off, I pull that lever up, drop the slide, pull the trigger, and then the slide comes off. Okay, so that's really easy on this firearm for me. I don't have an issue with this firearm in particular. This is the Springfield Hellcat. We're going to also be looking for whether or not the slide is easy to rack. This one I do have issues with. So this is not a very textured slide. This is a micro compact, so odds are you're going to rack the slide before you leave the house with dry hands. No issues, so that there's a round in the chamber, holstered, ready to go. This is a self-defense micro compact. You can see it's very small, very tiny in the hands. We'll compare it to a size of a bigger gun here, much smaller, okay? So the slide's not very good. It's a very high recoil spring for a very small slide with not very much texture. You can do things like put an optic on it and then it's easier to rack. You can rack it on a hard surface using the back irons. But unless I really like dry my hands and rack the slide aggressively, this is a hard slide to use. So when I purchased this firearm, my thought process was this was a high capacity magazine for a micro compact. At the time, it was the most rounds you could get in something this small, 13 rounds. So 14 with one in the chamber. It had a light option. It had an optic option. The trigger wasn't good. It wasn't bad. It's pretty average, but it's a very functional concealed carry option. So that's what I was looking for when I got this. So does it feel good in the hands? Trigger. Is the slide easy to use? Is the manual of arms good? Does it have features like a light and an optic? Are the sights good? Okay, so this has a night sight on it, and you can see that it's got a white high-vis U on the back. I can obtain this front sight really easily, and at night, that is made of tritium, and so tritium glows at night. The only way that I can really show this is my watch. These little things right here are made of tritium, and this is made of true glow. It's not dark enough for me to get the tritium to glow, really, but you can see the true glow lights up because it's been exposed to UV. Tritium does that automatically when it gets dark enough, and it doesn't need UV exposure to do it. So if you're out at night with this, you can see that front sight post just as easily as you can see it right now. You won't be able to see the back post as much, but as soon as you cover that front sight post with the back post, you'll know that you need to adjust over to the other direction to obtain sights. So that's something that I look out for, whether or not the irons are good, especially if you don't have an optic and you're not going to be getting an optic anytime soon. So those are the things that I look for. Now we're going to talk about everything here, and we're going to talk about some scenarios that kind of make some of those rules hard to figure out, okay? The first being what I hear salesmen say all the time. I'm going to hold this in my hand as I say it. When I go to the store and I'm waiting to look at a firearm that I'm thinking about purchasing, I will see new shooters ahead of me talking to the salesman, and they will say something along the lines of, just pick something that feels good in the hands, okay? And they'll show them a bunch of options, and inevitably, they'll end up holding a firearm, and they'll be like, oh, this feels great in the hands. And then they get it. And that's the only thing they ever really think about. Here's the problem with this. You'll eventually run into something like the FMK C9. This is a Gen 3 Glock recreation. It's very cheap. I think you can get these for about $220. They look fine. If you were just looking at this firearm, you'd be like, yeah, that's a gun. right? Until you start understanding about firearms a little bit, and then you realize, oh, like this looks cheap, and the trigger looks bulky and cheap, and oh, this tack rail doesn't really look great. First glance, this looks fine. It's got a proprietary mag. It's not even a Glock mag. So it's a Glock recreation, but you can't fit a Glock mag in here. You have to buy these magazines from FMK, and you can see they're very cheap. So we ran into a bunch of issues with this gun, but the thing is that it feels great in your hands, okay? It's got flat sides, which I really like. It's got nice groove right there. It's got finger grooves. The palm swell's not too obtrusive, but it's just enough so that you get a good grip on it. When you hold this firearm, you might think this would be really comfortable to shoot, okay? The side right here where you would rest your thumb is flat, so that's not going to tear up your thumb. And so every single thing about it, you're like, oh, that might actually be really good. My girlfriend bought this around the time, I believe, 2020, 2019, end of 2019, early 2020. And I knew a little bit about firearms. I knew she didn't want to spend a ton of money on guns, so I didn't stop her from getting it. I probably should have. We probably should have just gone a little bit more money and gotten something better. Because this, after we ended up getting it, didn't even feed properly. So when we were shooting it, the bullet wouldn't feed off of the magazine into the chamber because the feed ramp is very small and it didn't come very polished. So I ended up having to take this gun apart, get to the barrel, and I had to polish the feed ramp a lot just to get it to feed rounds. So it does feed rounds now. It is a semi-reliable firearm at this point. You could probably shoot every single round out of the magazine without it jamming up on you, but I don't trust it. I still think with that amount of issues, I would not trust this firearm with my life. So even though it's cheap and even though it feels good in the hands, I don't think it's a great option. Okay, so we're going to jump around. I'm going to talk about this Hellcat. I bought this Hellcat Springfield at the same time that my girlfriend bought the FMK. Springfield Hellcat, when I bought it, was about $460, so about twice the price, if not more, than the FMK. It's much smaller. It's a micro compact, which is what I was looking for. So this FMK is modeled after a Glock 19, which I consider to be a compact firearm. And you can see the Hellcat is much smaller, so it's what we would call a micro compact. So those are some terms that you need to get used to when buying your first firearm. The micro compacts are very small. They have a limited magazine capacity, and at the time that I bought this one, it has a higher magazine capacity than most other firearms available at this size. It had 13 rounds in it. Now you can get things like the P365, which come from anywhere 15 rounds to 17 rounds, depending on if you get the X macro or not. But at the time, this was very good. It had a light rail. It has a optics plate. It has a not good trigger, not bad trigger, just a decent trigger. You can see the take up there. Then you can feel the trigger pull. And then the reset looks like this. And it's resetting there. It's pretty decent for a micro. I kind of think it's a good gun. They make the Pro version. They make bigger versions of it now, like kind of compact, not micro compact versions of the Hellcat. I don't think it's your best option. If you're going to go Springfield, I highly recommend looking into the Springfield Echelon, and I'll explain that when we talk about this gun. Okay, so my girlfriend bought the FMK, and then she didn't end up liking it, even though we got it working, so she got a Smith & Wesson M&P Shield, okay? And there's multiple reasons why she would go with a weapon like this as opposed to the weapon like the FMK. One, it's more reliable, but two, this slide right here is what's called the EZ proprietary slide Smith & Wesson makes, but it's very easy to rack. Watch, I'm going to do it with 2 fingers. Okay, so being able to rack the slide, somebody who doesn't have as pronounced forearms or, you know, just has like a disability, like I have nerve damage in my left arm and I can rack this all day. I could shoot this at the range with no problem. So this is a good option for people that may need that extra leverage when racking the slide. It has a pretty decent trigger because it is internally hammer fired. Striker fired is what most polymer guns, meaning plastic handles, metal slides. Striker fired is going to be what you see on most polymer guns. And that means that there's a striker unit in the slide, and when you pull the trigger, the striker releases the firing pin into the primer of the cartridge. This is internally hammer fired. So what it means is on a revolver, there's a hammer that you pull back, and when it slams forward, it strikes the firing pin into the primer. Okay, so this has a hammer. It's just on the inside of the slide. You can't actually see it. It works kind of in the same way. You still have a firing pinhole and everything, but it's hammer based. Okay, which means that your trigger pull is very nice. You can see the wall is right there. There's not a lot of play from here to the wall. And then when you get to the wall and you pull the trigger, it's very crisp. And then the reset is also very crisp. Okay. So that is the Smith & Wesson Easy. It is a I would still consider this a micro compact. It's very thin, it's very small, and it fits about 7 to 8 rounds. So they make another firearm called the Equalizer, and the Equalizer is the same easy technology where the slide racks easily, but it carries 15 rounds, and it has an optics cut. You'll notice we have this outer impact optics plate. It's replacing the back iron sights on this firearm so that we can put an optic on the plate. This is not meant to have an optic on it. It does have a light capability, but not optic unless you get a third-party modification. Okay, so we talked about hammer-fired. We're going to jump over to an actual hammer-fired weapon. This is the Beretta 92 FS. I've already done a video on it, so I'm going to try to glaze over a few things. We're just going to talk about the basics. This is what we would call a full-size firearm. So we went from micro-compact, compact, full-size, okay? Full-size means it's just going to be a little longer. We'll again compare it to the Glock clone. You can see that the barrel is a little longer, right? And what that means is it's going to be a little heavier. So this is all steel. The frame is steel, not polymer. The grips are polymer. But having a heavy firearm is going to mean that when the round goes off, the recoil is going to be less. So this is actually a really flat shooter. It's an older firearm. It doesn't have an optics plate or tack rail for light. This was, I believe, created in 1976, and I think the U.S. Civilian market received these guns in 1989. The military has used them, police have used them. It's hammer-fired. So what this means is it doesn't have a striker system. It has a hammer system, and it's an external hammer. So you have access to this hammer. The hammer, when you pull it back, watch the trigger, pulls the trigger back, and now it's at the wall, or it's as close to the wall as you're going to get. So this is called single action, and because the hammer is already back, I only need to pull this a little bit, and the hammer slams forward, firing around. Okay, and then there's double action. So the hammer is already forward, and the trigger, if I pull the trigger, watch the hammer. It pulls the hammer back, and the same is true when I get back to this position. If I pull this any further, the hammer slams forward. Okay, so what that does is that gives you a very crisp single action, which will give you an accurate shot. Explaining this the best of my ability, I'm going to decock this for a second. We're just going to use the dead trigger to explain this. So when you put your finger on the trigger and you're pulling the trigger, even if you have proper grip on the handgun, if you're pulling the trigger too heavily, what's going to happen is as you pull the trigger, if you're putting pressure on it, notice how I'm drifting down and to the left? It's because you're pushing down and to the left with your finger, okay? So what that's going to do is it's going to make you shoot down and to the left. So having a crisp trigger pull, something that's really light and easy to do, means you're not going to be pushing on it as hard. So you'll get more accurate shots on target. So that's good to know. You should know that having a light trigger is going to allow for more accurate shots, but a light trigger is also going to mean that when you holster your firearm, the slightest bump of the trigger, if it's too much, if it's too light, could cause the trigger to pull. Okay, so this is combated with something like this because we can drop the slide, we can put the hammer back. So this is as light as it's going to be, right? We can put a round in the chamber, and then we can throw it on safe, which will decock the hammer. And now it will only function in double action if we put the safety off. So safety's on, you can't pull the trigger. So right now there would be a round in the chamber, holstered. You could pull the trigger all you want and nothing will happen. So when you draw it, you can take the safety off and then you can go straight to double action, which will prime the hammer and allow you to fire the round that you previously chambered. So that's kind of how this firearm functions. It's a complicated manual of arms if you don't know what you're doing, but if you learn this manual of arms, it can be one of the safest ones available. Okay, so I don't necessarily recommend this to new shooters, but if you are confident in your ability to learn a new manual of arms, this is something that you can really get into. And they make more modern versions of this. They make the Beretta M9, which will have an optics cut and a tack light, but it'll look pretty much the same. The decocker is just a decocker on that gun. So when you do that, it'll decock the firearm, but the decocker will flip back up and it will be live and not on safe. Okay, so just know that that's a thing. We're going to put this back down. So we have talked about full-size, compact, and micro-compact. We're going to jump over to, and so far everything I've shown you has kind of been an unmodified firearm with the exception of the optic on this gun. We're going to talk about modified firearms. So as you have purchased a firearm and you get into the world of firearms, you're going to want something with some modularity to it. You're going to want to be able to put a light on it, an optic on it, a new recoil spring, potentially a new trigger, a gas pedal, a compensator, grip tape, an advanced mag well. These are all things that you can upgrade on a firearm. The SIG P320 that we are looking at here has a FCU, fire control unit, right here. And that's the serialized part. So when you buy a SIG P320, what you're buying is essentially the internals of the firearm. And you can take these internals and put them into any grip that you want. So as you can see here, I have a Brower M1811 grip module. This is not the P320 grip. This is just one that I've added it into. So this is about as modular of a gun that you can get because you can change literally everything on it. Sig Sauer is in some hot water right now for the P320 series, specifically because of some uncommanded discharges that have popped up on the internet. An airman recently just died. They're doing an investigation into it for the US Air Force because, in theory, of a P320 that went off in its holster when it was aimed at him. And so I don't recommend a P320 right now to a new shooter. I would also just kind of advise staying away from Sig Sauer at this point. Whenever some new information comes out on what's actually going on, SIG might actually be a company that you might want to look back into. But at this point, I kind of recommend, if you don't know what you're doing and you aren't going to be looking into the firearms world or news frequently enough to maintain what's going on there, I would advise you steering clear of this for now. That having been said, this has been one of my favorite guns to shoot. I bought a very expensive optic for it, a very expensive light. The slide is very expensive. This is probably one of the most expensive handguns that I own. Okay. P365 is also made by Sig Sauer, and as far as I know, there's no issues with the P365 series, and they also have a fire control unit, but they fit in a micro compact, not a full size or compact. So, all right, we're going to jump over here. First gun we talked about was the FMK C9. It is a Glock clone. This is also a Glock clone, also Gen 3. This is more accurate and more in line with what a Glock is, right? So this is the Palmetto State Dagger. It's very cheap. You can get these for about $260. And they are more true to what a Glock is compared to the FMK C9. They actually use Glock mags. The parts are still kind of cheap, you can tell. Trigger is a little mushy. The mag release button, very stiff. The slide stop, very flimsy, but it all works. I've shot this gun plenty of times, haven't had any malfunctions with it. Comes optic cut, comes with a tack light, as you can see. I put a Braun light on it. Some of them come with threaded barrels like this. I haven't put a compensator on it yet, but you could. But it is a functioning firearm. I don't think that this is the most reliable firearm. If you were wanting a Glock, I suggest just getting a Glock for your first firearm. I don't like shooting Glock, so I ended up getting this because it was just a cheap option that I can toy around with. But I'm not telling new shooters just to listen to what I do. If you think Glock feels good in the hand, and here's the thing, Glock has a different grip angle than all the other firearms on this table. Okay. See how this is in line from here to here? And then that grip angle changes a little bit. So Glocks end up shooting kind of low when you are used to these grip angles, okay? They just have a slightly different feel in the hands that you have to get used to. You've got to adjust for it. And so you'll see people that are used to these grip angles tilting their wrist, and then when they shoot, they're getting what's called limp wristing. They're not shooting it properly. So when you get used to the Glock grip angle, that's not really an issue. You'll figure it out, you'll understand. So if it's your first gun, you can get really used to these, and that's great. And a lot of people in the US shoot Glock. So that shouldn't really be an issue if it's your first weapon. But if you are used to these, like Smith & Wesson, you're going to have a much easier time shooting something like a SIG, Smith & Wesson, Springfield, Ruger. All those are options, okay? So let's say you really like the idea of having Glock parts. So the number one reason to get a Glock, other than the reliability out of the box, is that they've been around so long that all of these parts are manufactured by other companies at this point. You can get a different slide that'll fit most Glocks. You can get different slide stops. You can get different magazine release buttons that are dual on both sides. You can get pretty much everything that will fit a Glock, okay? Ruger makes a gun now called the RXM, which is another Gen 3 Glock clone. And the cool thing about the Ruger Gen 3 Glock clone is that they have the other grip angle, okay? So they're not going to have the Glock grip angle. They still accept Glock parts for everything, but somehow they've figured out how to get a different grip angle. The other benefit to the RXM is that it's modular, like the P320, where you have that internal system that you can take out and put into another grip module. So that's a really good option. All right, we've kind of talked about all of these guns here. We haven't talked about this one. This is the Ruger Mark IV Lite. It is a 22 long rifle. And it is probably not one that I would get for a new shooter for self-defense because it's 22 long rifle. This is not powerful enough around to put a stop to a threat. So the reason why it's out and why I would recommend it is if you have the money to get this and another gun kind of like these, I suggest getting these. These are very good to practice at the range because 22 long rifle costs about 9 cents a round, whereas 9mm costs about 20 to 25 cents a round. So you can practice with this for cheap, which will give you really good grip placement, good trigger control, and it's not loud. It's not hearing safe. You'll still need ear pro when you shoot this, but it's much quieter. So if you're the type of person that will get a little nervous when a loud bang goes off, this is more manageable for somebody like that. So this is very, very good. It's got a rail so you can put an optic on it so you can practice optic shooting. It's got a threaded barrel, so if you wanted to get a suppressor and make it even quieter, you could do that. This is a very good option. These run about $460 to $480 depending on the day or the sale. But I do recommend those for new shooters to practice with. So if you can have another self-defense option, that can be a good option. This is my firearm. It's what I've gotten used to recently. It's got a light, it's got a recoil reduction spring, it's got a gas pedal, it's got an optic, it's got a Pretty good feel to the hands. I've got some goon tape, which reduces the roughness of the frame. It's got a metal grip. I've got a metal insert for the back strap coming, which will add weight to the back of the gun to balance it out. This is a kind of what will happen when you get into the firearms world. You'll start modding out the gun to fit your needs. This is what I enjoy shooting. This is the kind of firearm I enjoy shooting. I do recommend that as you get into this, you start adding things to the firearm that are going to let you do better at the range. And so some of the best advancements are putting a light, which adds weight to the front of the firearm. So the recoil, when it goes up, the weight helps you bring it back down. The optic, obviously, is going to be easier to aim than the iron sights. The gas pedal is going to help with the recoil because now your thumb is pressing down when the gun tries to rise. All of this is kind of your more advanced system when you get into this. So I do highly recommend getting something that has options to upgrade. Not every company is going to have a ton of third market support. Glock does, SIG does, Smith & Wesson does. Springfield is getting into that world with the Echelon. So I said I would mention the Echelon. The Echelon has another modular component like the P320. It's what they're getting into is the same kind of deal where you'll be able to swap out the internals, put it in another frame, and change everything about the firearm. So that seems to be the way a lot of firearm companies are going. I really like it. It means you don't have to do multiple background checks. So keep an eye out for that. If you do see like a Ruger RXM or a Springfield Echelon, check all of the things that we talked about today. The feel of the hand, the trigger, the slide, the manual of arms, figure out if it's something you enjoy, and then research a little bit about whether or not people have had malfunctions with it. Obviously, SIG is going to have a lot of malfunction news due to the uncommanded discharge stuff, but you can make up your mind on that yourself. I would advise against it for a new shooter. So if you have any questions that I haven't answered, drop a comment. I will respond. And if you have any more ideas of videos that I could do, I will look into whether or not I am capable of doing those videos and I will post them. Thanks for watching, guys.